Samuel Hartley was a man who had lived too long with sadness. His face was like old leather brown, weathered and marked by years of sun and rain. His hands were rough like tree bark. His eyes told stories of loss that nobody wanted to hear. The ranch sat in a valley that God seemed to have forgotten. Mountains rose on both sides, tall and silent like ancient guards that never spoke. The sky above was endless. You could see 50 miles if you looked hard enough. There were no towns nearby. There were no neighbors who visited. There was only the land, the animals, and the Hartley family, who lived as if the rest of the world did not exist. Samuel was 38 years old, but he looked 50. His wife, Catherine, had died 5 years ago from sickness that no doctor could cure. After she died, the ranch became quieter than a grave. The laughter that once filled the house was gone. The singing while cooking dinner disappeared. Even the sunlight seemed darker. Now Samuel lived with 2 children who were learning to survive, not to live. His daughter Emma was 14 years old. She was tall and thin, with her mother's dark hair and her father's serious eyes. Emma had stopped being a girl 3 years ago. She woke before sunrise to collect water from the creek. She cleaned the house. She cooked. She mended clothes. She worked like a grown woman because someone had to work. Her childhood was buried with her mother. William was 10 years old. He was smaller than other boys his age. He had a quiet voice that rarely made sound. People who didn't know him might think he was shy. But Samuel knew the truth. William was broken inside, just like his father. The boy loved his horse more than he loved people. He spoke to animals with more words than he ever spoke to humans. Sometimes Samuel would find William sitting alone in the barn, his head against his horse's neck, saying nothing, doing nothing, just breathing and existing in the company of an animal who did not ask him to feel happy. This was the Hartley family in the summer of 1887. But the ranch itself was beautiful, even if the family inside was wounded. The land rolled like waves made of grass. The creek ran clear and cold from the mountains. Tall trees created shade where animals could rest during the hot afternoons. The barn was old but strong, built by Samuel's father 40 years ago. The house was small, just 4 rooms, but it had a wide porch where you could sit and watch the valley stretch forever. On this particular morning, the day that would change everything, the world was perfect. The sun rose golden and warm. The sky was completely blue, not a single cloud anywhere. The birds sang like they had forgotten that sadness existed. The grass was still wet from morning dew, and when the sun touched it, the valley looked like it was covered in small diamonds. Samuel sat on the porch in an old wooden chair that creaked when he moved. He held a saddle in his lap. His hands moved slowly, carefully, stitching new leather where old leather had torn. Stitch after stitch. His fingers knew this work so well that he didn't need to think about it. His mind could wander while his hands worked. He was thinking about Catherine. He always was, even after 5 years. He remembered how she laughed a sound like wind chimes in summer. He remembered how she made bread, singing while she worked. He remembered how she loved the mornings, how she would stand on this very porch and watch the sun rise like it was a miracle happening just for her. The saddle in his hands was worn out. It belonged to the horse that mattered most, the horse named Storm. Storm was a dark mare, almost black, with a white patch on her forehead shaped like a lightning bolt. She was 7 years old. Samuel had bought her at an auction in town when she was only 3 years old, and she was dying. Her ribs showed through her skin. Her eyes were empty. She was thin and sick, and nobody wanted her. But Samuel saw something in those eyes. He saw life that wanted to live. So he bought her for almost nothing money he didn't have. He brought her home and fed her. He cleaned her wounds. He spoke to her in a soft voice. He treated her like she was family. Storm had changed. Her coat became shiny and dark. Her eyes filled with light. She became strong and wise. And somehow, In the strange way that animals and humans connect, Storm became the heart of the family. When Catherine died and the house went silent, it was Storm who stood in the pasture waiting for Samuel. When William felt too sad to speak, it was Storm's mane he would hold. When Emma felt alone with all her work, it was Storm who followed her around the ranch like a friend. Storm was not just a horse. Storm was the only thing keeping this family alive. William was near the barn, practicing with a rope. He was trying to learn how to lasso a skill that every ranch boy needed to know. His throws were bad. The rope fell short. It twisted. It didn't spin right, but he kept trying. That was William. He never gave up, even when he was failing. He would practice for hours alone, his small body working hard to do something that looked easy. Emma was at the creek, filling large buckets with water. The water was cold and clean. It came down from the mountains, fresh and pure. She was strong for a girl her age. She could carry buckets that boys twice her age would struggle with. Her arms were lean and muscular from years of this work. Her hands were red from the cold water, but her face showed no complaint. This was her job. She would do it. The valley was quiet except for natural sounds. The creek made music as it ran. Wind moved through the grass and trees, creating whispers. Birds called to each other. Insects buzzed. It was the sound of nature living peaceful, endless, perfect. Samuel continued his stitching. The needle moved in and out, in and out. His mind was half awake, half dreaming. He thought about Catherine. He thought about how she would have loved this morning. He thought about how his children were growing up too fast, learning too much pain too young. The mountains stood silent. The sky remained blue and endless. The sun climbed higher, promising a hot afternoon. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. The world felt ordered and right. Samuel did not know that danger was coming. He did not know that by tomorrow, everything would change forever. He did not know that today was the last day of his old life. He sat on the porch, stitching leather, thinking about his dead wife, watching his broken children work, and feeling the warmth of a perfect summer morning. None of them knew. None of them understood that nature was about to speak in a voice so loud it would shake the earth itself. But Storm knew. Somewhere inside her horse heart, Storm already understood.
The sun was fully up when they heard the sound of horses. Samuel was sitting on the ground, holding William against his chest. Emma was still awake, watching the valley. Storm was grazing peacefully, as if the world had not been destroyed the day before. The sound came from the south. Multiple horses, multiple riders. Samuel stood up slowly, his body aching from the night of sitting without moving. His legs felt stiff. His back felt broken. But he stood. Coming over the hill were riders from the town. 5 men on horseback. They were coming fast, their horses moving quickly over the rocky ground. As they got closer, Samuel recognized the town doctor, the sheriff, and 3 other men from the distant town where he sometimes bought supplies. Samuel, the sheriff, was riding ahead. His name was Marshal Thompson, a big man with a loud voice. "We got word about the flood. We came as fast as we could." The riders slowed as they reached the top of the hill. They looked around and saw the destroyed valley. They saw the water still flowing below. They saw the Hartley family covered in dirt and exhaustion. But they also saw something else. They saw a family that was alive. They saw a father and 2 children standing together. They saw a horse standing beside them like a guardian. "My God," said the doctor, whose name was Harrison. "You survived? How is this possible?" Samuel did not answer right away. He looked at his children. He looked at Storm. He looked at the destroyed world below them. "The horse," he said simply. "Storm saved us. She knew about the flood before it came. She brought us to high ground." The men looked at the dark mare with the white lightning bolt on her forehead. They looked at how the family stood close to her. They looked at the undeniable truth written across Samuel's face. "That's impossible," one of the men said. His name was Carter, and he owned a store in town. "No," Samuel said. His voice was strong and certain. That is the only thing that is possible. Without Storm, we would all be dead. Marshall Thompson looked at the hill where they were standing. He looked at the water below. He understood. The water was powerful enough to destroy the barn and the house. Thompson said slowly, but it couldn't climb this hill fast enough. Storm knew that, Samuel said. Storm knew the water was coming. She knew where to go. She told the other animals. She saved my family. The doctor, Harrison, rode closer to the family. He examined them carefully. Emma and William were alive. Samuel was alive. Nobody was hurt seriously, just exhausted and traumatized and grateful. This is a miracle, Harrison said. This is truly a miracle. The rescue party had brought supplies, food, water, blankets. They helped the Hartley family down from the hill. Storm followed without being led. The horse stayed close to William, never moving far away from the boy who had held her through the night. As they rode back toward town, the story began to spread. By the time they reached the town of Copper Creek, a crowd was waiting. News of the flood had spread fast. The townspeople knew that Samuel Hartley and his children lived on the edge of town. They had expected tragedy, but instead they found a story about a horse that knew, a story about an animal that could sense danger, a story about loyalty that had no limits, a story about a family saved by the impossible knowing of a single horse. Over the next weeks, the legend grew. Cowboys and saloons told the story. Did you hear about the Hartley horse? The one that saved the entire family from a flood? She knew the water was coming before any human could hear it. The story traveled from town to town. It spread like wildfire across the frontier. People who had never met Samuel Hartley knew his story. People who had never seen the ranch knew about the flood. And everyone knew about Storm. In those weeks, Samuel and his children stayed in town. The townspeople helped them. They gave them food. They gave them a small house to stay in. The doctor checked on them every day to make sure they were healing. But Samuel was already thinking about rebuilding. 2 weeks after the flood, Samuel found a new piece of land. It was higher than the old ranch. It was safer. Local men came to help him build a new barn, a new house, a new beginning. William worked beside his father every day. The boy did not speak, but his small hands helped carry wood and nails. His presence was enough. His loyalty to his father matched Storm's loyalty to the family. Emma cooked for the workers. She managed supplies. She organized the work. At 14 years old, she had become the spine of the family, just like her mother had been. And Storm stood in the pasture and watched. She grazed. She was calm. She was home. 3 months after the flood, the new ranch was ready. It was smaller than the old ranch, but it was built on solid ground. The barn was strong. The house was small but comfortable. The pasture was green. On the day they moved into the new house, Samuel did something special. He made a ceremony. A simple ceremony with no church and no preacher. Just family and animals. He stood in front of the house with Emma and William. He walked to Storm and put his hand on her neck. "This ranch is built because of you," he said to the horse. "This family is alive because of you. Everything we have now, everything we will ever have, is because of you." William came and rested his head against Storm's side. Emma put her arm around her brother. Samuel wrapped his other arm around both his children. "Storm," Samuel said, "you are not just a horse. You are family. You are a hero. And as long as I live, and as long as my children live, we will remember that you saved us." From that day forward, the ranch became known as Storm's Hill. Not officially, not on any map, but that is what people called it. Travelers would pass through the valley and ask, "Where's the place where the horse saved the family?" And people would point and say, "Storm's Hill." That is where a horse knew what no human could know. That is where loyalty changed destiny. Years passed. Emma grew up and married a man from town, but she never forgot Storm. William became a quiet, strong man, but he spent every moment he could with the horse. Samuel worked hard and rebuilt his life. And Storm grew old. Her dark coat became gray. Her movements became slower. But her eyes never lost that knowing look, that understanding, that wisdom that came from somewhere beyond words. When William was grown, with children of his own, he would take them to Storm's pasture and tell them the story. "That horse saved our family," he would say. She knew something that no human could know. She was stronger than the flood. She was smarter than fear. She was loyal beyond measure. And the children would listen, and they would understand that sometimes the greatest heroes do not wear uniforms or carry guns. Sometimes the greatest heroes are quiet. Sometimes they have 4 legs instead of 2. Sometimes they speak in a language that has no words. The end. The sun disappeared below the mountains, and darkness came to the valley like a blanket being pulled slowly across the world. The Hartley family sat on the hill. They did not move. They did not speak. They just sat in the knowledge that they were alive. Samuel sat with his back against a large rock. His eyes were closed. His face was exhausted, the kind of exhausted that comes not from hard work, but from nearly dying, from understanding how close they had come to being swept away, from knowing that they would never see their home again. Emma sat beside her father. She was still holding William's hand. The boy was quiet, as he always was, but this quiet was different. It was the quiet of shock. It was the quiet of a child who had seen something too big for his mind to understand. Storm stood above them. She was grazing on the grass of the hill, calm and peaceful, as if nothing had happened, as if the world below them was not destroyed, as if the valley was not filled with brown water and broken things. But Storm was still alert. Sometimes she would lift her head and look down the valley. Sometimes her ears would point toward the sound of the water. She was watching, always knowing. Hours passed. The stars came out, more stars than anybody had ever seen before. The sky was full of them, like diamonds scattered across black cloth. Usually, the Hartley family would have found this beautiful. But tonight, the stars just made the world feel very large and very empty and very lonely. William had fallen asleep against Emma's shoulder. His small body was curled up like a baby animal. Even in sleep, his hand held onto Emma's dress. He needed to feel that his sister was still there, that she had not been taken away by the water. Emma was awake. She looked at her father. "Dad." Her voice was very small. "What do we do?" Samuel opened his eyes slowly. He looked at his daughter. She was 14 years old, but right now she looked much older, or much younger. Samuel was not sure which. She looked like someone who had seen too much and knew too much and had to be brave anyway. "I don't know," Samuel said honestly, "but we are alive, and that is what matters." "The house is gone," Emma said. She was not crying. She was just stating facts. "The barn is gone. Everything is gone." "Yes," Samuel said. "Everything is gone. But we are here," Emma said, and she looked at Storm. "Because of her." Samuel nodded slowly. He stood up and walked to where Storm was standing. The horse turned her head to look at him. Those eyes, those dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets and wisdom and truth. "Thank you," Samuel whispered to the horse. "Thank you for knowing. Thank you for saving us." Storm did not move away. She let Samuel put his forehead against hers. They stood like that for a long time, a man and a horse, both understanding something that words could not explain. The water continued to flow below them, but it was moving slower now. The violence was passing. The flood was becoming just water instead of a monster. But everything was different now. Everything would always be different. As midnight came, the moon rose. It was almost full, and it painted everything silver. The destroyed valley looked strange in the moonlight. The water looked like a dark mirror. The broken pieces of the barn and the house were just shadows. William woke up. He did not cry out. He just opened his eyes and looked around, tried to remember where he was and what had happened. "William," Emma said softly. "It's okay. You're safe." William did not answer with words. He never did. But he pushed himself up and walked to where Storm was standing. Without asking, without waiting, he put his head against the horse's neck and wrapped his small arms around her. His hands disappeared in her dark mane. Storm did not move. She stood perfectly still while the boy held her. She understood something that humans often forgot. Sometimes holding is the only language that matters. Samuel watched his son hold the horse that had saved him, and he understood something true and deep and real. Storm was not just a horse. Storm was family. Storm was the bridge that connected this broken family together. Storm was the thing that had kept them alive not just today, but every day since Catherine died. Every day When sadness wanted to pull them under, Storm was there. Every day, when they felt too alone, Storm was there. Emma joined her brother. She put her arms around Storm too, together with William. The three of them, a 14-year-old girl, a 10-year-old boy, and a 7-year-old horse, stood together under the moonlight, holding onto each other. Samuel walked to them and put his arms around all of them, his children and his horse, his family, the only family he had left. "We will be okay," he whispered. "Storm will help us. We will rebuild." Emma looked up at her father. "How do you know?" "Because," Samuel said, "we have each other, and we have Storm. And a horse that can sense danger and save families is a horse that can help us do anything." William said nothing, but his grip on Storm became tighter. His small face showed no tears, but his body was shaking with emotion that had no words. They stood like that through the night. As the hours passed and the moon moved across the sky, they stayed together. Sometimes one of them would move slightly. Sometimes someone would shift their weight. But they never let go. Storm never moved away. She stood like she had been waiting her whole life to do exactly this. To be held, to be trusted, to be family. As the first light of dawn began to show in the east, the water below them began to slow even more. The emergency had passed. The danger was gone. The flood was becoming history. But the lesson remained. Samuel looked down at his destroyed ranch. He looked at the water that had taken everything. He looked at his children holding onto a horse. And he understood something that would change him forever. Humans were not the strongest creatures in the world. Humans were fragile and small and easily broken. But humans had something that made them strong. They had the ability to trust. They had the ability to love. They had the ability to hold on to each other when everything else was gone. And sometimes the greatest strength came from the smallest creatures. From a horse that knew what humans could not know. From an animal that loved without asking for anything in return. This was the silent truth. The truth that needed no words. The truth that lived in the space between heartbeats. The truth that lived in the eyes of a horse who had saved 3 lives. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky orange and gold, Samuel Hartley stood with his children and his horse. They had nothing. Their home was gone. Their ranch was destroyed. Their lives would never be the same. But they were alive. And that was everything. Samuel did not wait to understand everything. He did not wait for proof. He did not wait for his brain to catch up with his heart. "Emma, William, get to the hill now." His voice was different. It was the voice of a man who had made a choice. A choice to trust an animal more than he trusted his own eyes. A choice to move faster than fear. A choice that would save 3 lives. "What? Dad, I don't understand." Emma started to speak. "Now." Samuel's voice crashed like thunder. "Move." Emma saw the look in her father's eyes. It was a look she had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was certainty. It was the look of a man who knew something true, even if he could not explain it. She grabbed William's hand. The boy was confused, scared, but he did not ask questions. He ran with his sister toward the small hill behind the barn, the hill where hay was stored, the highest point on the ranch. His small legs moved as fast as they could. Samuel did not run. He walked to Storm with purpose. He did not need to pull her rope. Storm already wanted to go upward. She wanted to climb. She wanted to reach the highest ground. Samuel simply walked beside her, and the horse followed him like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The other horse followed. The cow followed, moving slowly but moving. The goats were already there, already climbing. The chickens flew upward in scattered jumps. The barn cat was already halfway up, her gray body moving between rocks and grass. Samuel and Storm reached the hilltop just as Emma and William dropped to the ground, breathing hard from running. "What's happening?" Emma gasped. "What did you?" Then they heard it. The sound started far away. A deep, distant roar like a monster waking up from sleep. Like the earth itself was growling. Like the world was breaking open. Samuel turned toward the sound. What he saw would stay with him forever. The creek, the small, peaceful creek where Emma had filled water buckets that very morning, was no longer a creek. It had become something else. Something alive. Something furious. A wall of water was coming down the valley. Not a wave. A wall. Enormous. Dark brown like earth mixed with anger. So high it seemed to touch the sky. Water that moved with power that no human could fight. Water that destroyed everything in its path. Trees that had stood for 100 years were ripped from the earth like grass. Rocks the size of houses tumbled in the current like children's toys. The sound was not like any sound they had ever heard. It was the sound of nature screaming. William made a small noise. Not a word. Not quite a scream. Just a small, terrified sound from a 10-year-old boy who did not understand what he was seeing. Emma's hand gripped Samuel's arm so hard it hurt. "Run," she whispered, but there was nowhere to run. The water came down the valley with speed that made everything look slow. It swallowed the lower pasture. It covered the ground where they had been standing just minutes ago. It hit the barn like an angry fist, and the barn, the strong barn that Samuel's father had built 40 years ago, exploded into pieces. Wooden boards flew into the air like feathers. The roof twisted and broke. The walls fell. The entire building came apart as if it was made of paper instead of solid wood. The house came next. The small house where Samuel had lived his entire life. The house where his children were born. The house where Catherine had died. The house that held all their memories and all their pain. The water swept it away like it was nothing. The walls crumbled. The roof flew upward and backward. The porch where Samuel had been sitting just hours ago, stitching leather, disappeared into the brown water. Everything they owned was gone in seconds. Everything was destroyed, but they were alive. Samuel pulled his children close to him as the water surged around the base of the hill. The water could not climb the hill. The slope was too steep. The hill was too high. The water raged and thundered below them, but could not reach them. Emma held William. The boy was shaking. His small body was trembling like a leaf in a storm. Emma was crying, but she did not let go of her brother. She just held him and whispered things that he could not hear over the sound of the water. Samuel stood with his hand on Storm's neck. The horse was absolutely still, completely calm, like she had always known this would happen, like she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Like this was her purpose. The water continued to rage. It lasted for hours. The sound was so loud that nobody could think. Nobody could speak. There was only the roar of water and the power of nature, showing everyone how small humans really are. Samuel watched his ranch disappear. The pasture where he had worked for 30 years. The fence he had built with his own hands. The trees where Catherine used to sit and read books. All of it was gone, but his children were alive. As the afternoon became evening, the water began to slow. The roar became quieter. The brown water began to move less violently. The power of the flood was passing. Samuel looked at his children. Emma was still holding William. William was looking at Storm with eyes that seemed to understand something he could not explain. Storm stood without moving. Her dark coat was beautiful in the fading sunlight. Her white lightning bolt marking on her forehead seemed to glow. She had saved them, not with strength, not with size, but with knowing, with sensing, with feeling something that no human could feel. Samuel did something he had not done in 5 years. Since Catherine died, his face became wet with tears, not quiet tears, real tears, big tears that showed that his heart was still capable of breaking and healing at the same time. He put both his arms around Storm's neck and pressed his head against her. He did not try to hide the tears. He did not try to be strong. He just let himself feel everything, the loss, the fear, the gratitude, the miracle of this moment. Emma watched her father cry. She had not seen him cry since before her mother died. She had thought he might never cry again. But he was crying now, not for sadness, for life, for survival, for a horse that had done what no human could do. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and red, the Hartley family sat on the hill with their animals. They sat in silence. They sat in shock. They sat in the knowledge that they were alive. And it was all because one horse had known. Storm had heard what humans could not hear. Storm had felt what humans could not feel. Storm had trusted her instinct more than she trusted anything else. And she had saved them all. It started small, so small that most people would not have noticed. Samuel was still sitting on the porch. His hands continued their work on the saddle, but something had changed in the air. He felt it before he understood it. It was like the feeling you get before a storm, when the sky is still blue, but the wind begins to move differently. Storm stood in the pasture near the barn. She was grazing, eating grass like a normal horse would do. But something was wrong. Samuel could see it from the porch. Her ears were pointed in different directions, not relaxed like they usually were. She kept lifting her head, up and down, like she was listening to something nobody else could hear. Samuel watched her for a few moments. Then he looked away. Then he looked back. She was doing it again, lifting her head, listening, her whole body becoming stiff and alert. At first, Samuel thought maybe she was sick. Maybe something was wrong with her stomach. Horses sometimes got sick from eating bad grass or drinking bad water. But no, her movements were not the movements of a sick animal. She was not stumbling. She was not sweating. She was listening. Samuel put down his saddle work and stood up from his chair. He stretched his back, which was always stiff from bending over leather and rope. His legs felt heavy as he walked down the porch steps toward the pasture where Storm stood. "Hey girl," he called out softly. "Everything okay?" Storm turned her head toward him. Her eyes were wide, not normal, not calm like they usually were. Her eyes looked almost afraid. Samuel walked closer. When he reached Storm, he put his hand on her neck. Her skin was warm, but something felt different. Her muscles were tight. Her whole body was tense like a spring that had been wound too tight. "What is it?" Samuel whispered to the horse. "What do you hear?" Storm did not move. Her ears continued to point upward and sideways, toward the mountains, toward the creek, toward sounds that Samuel's human ears could not detect. The horse was trying to tell him something. Samuel knew this. He had lived long enough with animals to understand this language. The language without words. He looked toward the mountains. The sky was still perfectly blue. The wind was still warm and gentle. There was nothing that looked dangerous. There was nothing that sounded wrong to human ears. But horses hear things differently. They feel things differently. Their ears can turn in directions that human ears cannot. Their bodies can sense danger the way a knife can sense water. Samuel remained there, his hand on Storm's neck, trying to understand. The horse was breathing faster now. Her nostrils were flaring. She moved slightly away from him and walked toward the barn, then back toward him, then toward the barn again. It was like she wanted to tell him something, but did not know how. "Come on, girl," Samuel said. "Show me what you know." But Storm could not show him. She could only feel it, and she could only try to escape it by moving, by pacing, by doing anything except staying still. Samuel decided to check her body carefully. He ran his hands down her legs, looking for cuts or injuries. He found nothing. He checked her hooves. No stones, no wounds, nothing wrong. He looked at her mouth to see if there was something stuck there. Everything was normal. Her body was perfectly fine, but her spirit was terrified. Over the next hour, Storm's behavior became stranger. She stopped eating. She would not stand still. She paced back and forth in the pasture like a prisoner in a cage. Sometimes she would stand on her hind legs and whimsy, a sound that Samuel had almost never heard from her before. It was a sound full of fear and desperation. William noticed first. The boy had stopped practicing with his rope. He stood near the barn, watching Storm, his small face showing confusion and worry. "Dad," William called out. His voice was quiet as always. "Why is Storm acting like that?" Samuel did not answer right away. He was still trying to understand it himself. "I don't know, son," Samuel finally said. "But something is wrong. I can feel it." Emma came from the direction of the creek, her buckets of water sloshing against her legs. She saw the worry on her father's face and the strange behavior of the horse. "What happened?" she asked. She was smart like that, always understanding when something was wrong. "Storm knows something," Samuel said. His voice was serious and quiet. "We need to pay attention." As if to prove his point, Storm made the desperate whinnying sound again. And then something remarkable happened. The other horse, the old brown horse that Samuel used for working cattle, lifted his head and began to move toward the higher ground. He walked slowly but with purpose. He was following some instruction that only he and Storm seemed to understand. Then the goats started to move. 3 of them climbed toward the rocks behind the barn. Then the 4th goat joined them. They were climbing upward, away from the lower parts of the ranch. The chickens became nervous. They scattered and ran toward the barn, away from the open ground. They clucked and made worried sounds. The rooster flew up onto the fence, his feathers puffed out like he was trying to make himself bigger and braver. Even the barn cat, a gray animal that usually sat in the sun doing nothing, stood up and began walking toward high ground. Her tail was fat and fluffy. Her ears were back. Samuel stood very still, watching all of this. Every animal on the ranch was responding to something. Something that humans could not see or hear. Something that Storm knew. "Dad," Emma said, and now her voice was shaking slightly. "This is scary. What's happening?" Samuel did not answer because he did not have an answer. But he knew his daughter was right. This was scary. This was the kind of feeling you get when nature is about to speak, and she speaks in a language of power and danger. Storm walked directly to him and pressed her head against his chest. Samuel put both his arms around her neck. He could feel her heart beating very fast. Very fast. "Okay, girl," he whispered into her mane. "I hear you. I believe you." Samuel turned to look at his children. Both of them were standing near him now, William and Emma, their young faces showing fear they did not understand. "Emma, William," Samuel said, and his voice was different now. It was the voice of a man who understands that something serious is about to happen. "Come here. Stay close to me." "What's wrong, Dad?" William's small voice was shaking. "I don't know yet," Samuel said truthfully, "but we're going to listen to Storm. She knows something that we don't. And right now, we need to trust her more than we trust our own eyes." The sun was still shining. The sky was still blue and perfect. But standing there with his arm around Storm, watching all the animals gather toward higher ground, Samuel Hartley understood something deep in his bones. Danger was coming. It was coming fast, and only the animals could feel it approaching. The silence that followed was heavy and waiting, like the whole world was holding its breath.